Harry, welcome
Joe.
to the studio. How
Nice.
are you?
I'm pretty well. Good to see you again.
Yeah, you as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming all the way down here.
Yeah, no worries.
Not without reason though. You got
Yeah.
the exhibition for our tomorrow. Everyone else's last week. But
Yeah. But the weather did give me trouble, so I'm hoping it'll be worth it. Of course it'll be worth
I think the weather's meant to be good tomorrow though, so
Really?
hopefully it's
Okay.
it's looking like sunshine tomorrow. So
it. Yeah.
at least
Just
no
a
lessons.
blizzard, no one wants to leave the house. Just a complete whitewash.
I think we'll be all good. Did
Yeah.
you want to say a little bit about the project?
Yeah,
No.
yeah. So, super excited. Totems Exhibition. Series of like mounted pieces. You've seen a couple of them, obviously. Collage-y, like very mixed media. So doing a lot of painting on there, combining photo collage with poetry, some more like experimental like note-taking on there as well. But it's definitely the first of its kind. And like I was saying to you, well, for me, and like I was saying to you, I'm just very much trying to do something that kind of just got away from me just putting photos on a wall. Not because there's anything wrong with that, and sometimes that is the way that a project's meant to be, but I just didn't feel like that was what I wanted to do here.
And I think as well, like from hearing more about like you and your practice, like you said that you started off with writing, so this feels like
Yeah.
kind of you've had the excursion into photography and then like tying it back in a little bit. So this
Yeah.
feels like where they're meeting in the middle.
Yeah, I think I very much always like thought like a writer. The things that intrigue me photographically are the things that I can't describe, things that I can't put into words. And so then there's that like tandem going on where they're almost like speaking in different ways. Like for me, photography has to do something that writing maybe necessarily can't, where it's like can't overtly tell me what to think. Whereas I feel like a photograph, a compelling photograph for me in my own work is one that it's not obvious what it's saying, maybe, and it's working more subterraneously on you.
Yeah, and it's an interesting sort of space photography or like power it has to do that,
Yeah.
where it's often like it's weird. I was showing my mum one of the layouts of one of the books I'm working on, and it's the back cover of one, and she was like, "I like that, but I don't know why." And that for me was like, okay, so I've kind of achieved what I like to achieve, where it is that sort of space where people, and it's happened a few times with various photos, like people will say like, I like it, but I can't put my finger on it. And I feel like it always pisses me off the other way with a lot of photography where people are like, I like it because of X, Y, Z, and it's because it's because it's comfortable and they've seen it before. So they're like, that is my notion of good applied to it, rather than kind of taking it for what it is. And that sort of space is strange because, like you say, you can't quantify it in words.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think the worst thing I can hear as a photographer is this. That photo is really cool because it looks like a tree, or it looks like this pet I used to have, or it reminds me of this. Because it's like, I don't know, it's just not intriguing to me. But when the best thing someone can say is this, that's really cool. I don't know what it is, and I don't know why it works, but it works. And I don't know why it's intriguing, but it just looks like something's going on there, and I can't quite put my finger on it.
Yeah.
Whether it's like movement or something like figuratively that you just don't understand. And a lot of the work in the exhibition is like that. You'll see in the collages. And it kind of works for collage as well, because like by themselves, the images are almost redundant because they're not saying anything. But when they're together and it's creating more of an ambience and it's with text in some situations, that's when I think it starts to
it's
do
the
compelling
space where
things.
they tie together a little bit and they affect each other. I wonder as well, because there's always that curiosity about what the response is going to be to a work, more than there's like there seems to be two schools of thought. There's the photographers who tend to do like heavily curate, and they put stuff up being like with maybe a very specific goal in mind. And then there's like what we're talking about, where it's like you're trying to find that sort of space where people go. And like we've talked a fair bit about sort of like mass printing and like having projects with loads of imagery within it. And I wonder whether those things go hand in hand. Because sometimes I have a real issue with trying to like edit down projects. Like, like the one I was showing you that's going to end up 200 pages. The original layout of that was like 32. And then I was like, no, I need to just put them all back in because I just want to see how people respond to it. And there's stuff that I'll overlook that other people will dig into. Yeah. And I wonder if that's where that sort of style comes from.
Possibly.
Just sort of being like, well, maybe that's the one.
Yeah.
Because the photos that people have responded to that are never the ones that I'm like, know that people are going to respond in that way too.
It surprises you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think, so crits for at uni were really good for this, right? Because you could kind of mediate your preferences and see if this was actually working or if it was just a delusion because you liked something like yourself.
Yeah.
Or because it like resonates to one of your memories or it's nostalgic for you, but you don't even know it sometimes. But your first point is interesting. I think it's a real I don't know if it's a problem, but like a point of contention in photography. It's like, are you making and photographing something to say something? Like, do you know what you're doing, or are you exploring? And I think I can only speak for myself. If I know exactly what I'm doing, I know exactly what the photo is going to look like, and I've already got that mapped, to me it feels almost like propagandistic. It's like, there's no point, because you know what you're saying.
Yeah.
You can just say it.
Whereas it's sort of that thing. It's like, where's the fun for the photographer?
Yeah.
If you know that, I almost like to think of some of my stuff as just sort of like a science experiment.
Yeah.
Like I normally have some level of like trying to express something, but often the techniques lead me places where I'm not entirely sure what the visual output's going to be, even if the sort of that sort of propagandist element is maybe a bit more concrete. It's just sort of, and that's also what leads me to have projects that look entirely different at times, which is also arguably in some people's eyes like a massive issue. Yeah. But for me, that's what's interesting, is that I don't necessarily know what the project's going to visually come out like, because I'm working in that sort of intuitive way that just leads to things appearing, and it's that part of it that interests me. As if I had just planned to do it, then it does feel a little bit like you've not been, it's going to sound really fucking weird, but like you've not been gifted it by photography itself, so you're not really doing photography anymore. You're trying to force your sort of
control the world, manipulate forces. It's almost like two different arts. It feels like those two different processes, and they look completely different and they feel completely different. And I can only speak for myself because I'm in a different situation to everyone else. But I just feel as if I know exactly what the point is, then I can just say it better anyway, or I can write it better anyway. Photography for me is an avenue for exploration of the things I don't understand. It's the fact that it will utterly show you something that's there, whether you understand it or not.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because as well with a lot of my methodology, it's oftentimes shooting almost brain off and then coming back to look at it, and like you say, it shows you what's there whether you want to think or not, and it's like how you then interpret that. And that's where a lot of the actual engagement with the work comes from, is that sort of sitting down with however many images and being like, so what's actually going on here, and then piecing it back together from the photography, rather than doing that before and then trying to steer what you're shooting into that message when, and it's like you say, that is potentially quite propagandist, because you're going, I have this point of view that I want to get across, so I might change my composition, I might shoot things in a certain way to sort of give that vibe, which is where it becomes potentially dishonest.
At the very least, it's propagandistic to yourself, right? You're kind of like deluding yourself of like what you're actually seeing. If you start, I mean, with like a preconceived notion of it, but if, like you say, you're like adapting and just kind of shooting everything and then pulling back from that, then you've got a more honest scope of what you've experienced. I suppose we're talking in certain contexts here, obviously, like probably documentary or street or something where you're out in the world.
Yeah.
But that just seems essential to me, and to me it's a moral obligation. I don't think you can go into a new place with an idea of what the place already is.
Yeah, and you spoke briefly earlier about being like responding to places, and that idea of it being a response rather than a sort of, I'm going to go to this place to shoot this specific thing or to show it in a certain light.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily lead to interesting work, and also can lead to sort of dishonest work. Because I mean, you've been producing some stuff in Europe and Serbia as well recently.
Yeah.
Which how did you find that process?
It's really good. I mean, it's much like what we're talking about. So, like 2 examples, like Serbia, I went there, and it was extremely different to my experience photographing in like Prague, say. Like Serbia was extremely dynamic, aggressive, but also very warm, and like I'm responding to all of these things I'm feeling, and then as I'm starting to gain this mental picture of what Belgrade is to me, I'm then kind of, those moments are illuminating themselves even more, and then that starts to take shape. And then in Prague, for example, it was much more like solitary, elusive, like quite mysterious. Like it was like in the bleak of winter, like there was like loads of snow and blizzard. Like I was often going out at night. It was very just a psychologically different space, but you know, I fully threw myself into that, however disorientating that might be, or whether I expected to or not. Like I might go to a place and feel as if I haven't even been anywhere, like I haven't actually done anything. But if I'm photographing it, then that's part of it.
Yeah, and it is sort of strange. It's like you said, there's the psychological experience and sort of it's different even in places that feel like they should possibly be similar. As well, like I recently went to Morocco, and to be honest, like I was on a separate commission, so I had like a more like, we're going here to get this sort of thing, which is sort of, you know, betrays entirely what we've just talked about. But in terms of like personal stuff, the first bit, like it was a very strange experience. I was like, probably like day 3 in the back of my mind being like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to shoot anything here. Like just had this weird thing about it where I was just not, I don't know, just had from everywhere else where I've traveled or shot, it just had this thing where I was like, I'm actually kind of struggling to pick stuff out.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, to be fair to you, it's a different headspace. You're going to do commission. I don't do any documentary commission work. And the fact that you have a need to have something to take away, instantly you're in a different setting.
And yeah, to be fair, like obviously I was shooting the commission, and what I'm talking about struggle was just personal stuff.
Okay.
But like I did just show you all those photos there, which was after the commission ended. So I think in part I was trying to do 2 things at once, and like they were getting in the way of each other rather than just
they're good photos,
which feels better. And I think that also comes from like mild frustration of like, okay, so I can finally just do my own photography, and I'm stuck on a fucking bus, and they're not stopping for interesting things. But I think that's possibly what makes the work interesting, because it's not just stop off and take street photos. They're these sort of stuff sailing by, and you can't really see.
The work, doesn't it? It happens for a reason.
Yeah.
So a question for you then. Before you got all the photos you did from Morocco, can you like imagine like what kind of photos you expected to get? Do you know?
Yes and no. I think somewhat I tend to default to that sort of black and white aesthetic. So unless there's something, and especially in a time frame of like, that project was shot over the course of maybe 3-4 days. I'm not going to have enough time to sit on it to like develop a separate aesthetic. So that seems to be, I don't know, a default setting. So I tend to know like worst case I'm going to shoot in that style unless I have a reason not to.
So you expected to get things that would like be complementary to black and white. So like, you know.
Yeah, and I think looking for that, I think as well, like, yeah, no, it's really difficult. It's sort of this thing where you do just follow your instincts. And the one sort of thread that I'm noticing between like all the projects, regardless of it being color, digital film, or like harsh Technicolor or whatever, is that it's the idea of the subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And what always comes through in the series once I put it together and like actually take the time to like think about it and have it finished. Normally once I've done the layout of the book and then sat down and been like, so what am I actually yapping on about?
Yeah, sure.
It tends to be about what's in the back of your mind, the subconscious.
Okay,
and that's sort of only recently become sort of aware of that in my work.
Okay, yeah.
But it is a common thread that can be traced back as well.
Yeah.
Which I think makes sense, comes through because I'm trying to shoot unconsciously and then engaging with the work afterwards.
Right.
And I think that's what it's a response to the place, but it's more of a response to that. Yeah, what's in the back of your mind. So like with Morocco, there is loads of stuff in Morocco that's like, how many people DM'd me before being like, you do know you're not going to get any photos in the Medina. They do not let you take photos. They get really mad about it. And like certain areas do. And there's a lot of things about like some people interpret it's some part of Islam that's like you're not meant to leave anything behind when you die. And that can be interpreted as photography.
Sure.
And I think there's also various sort of, also in the Medina, they know tourists will just give you money to take photos, but they can get like, it's just a mess sort of thing. So you have to be kind of sneaky, which I think also the tour bus kind of helped with, because you're flying by. It's like, even if they spot you, like what are they going to do? Chase down a bus that's going 50 miles an hour down the mountain? Like, good luck.
And there you go. And then that becomes part of the story of the work, right?
So, and like I said, on like day 3 being like, fuck, I don't think I'm going to get anything personal here. So it's like, that project comes through as like the frustration of like, fuck, now we're stuck on a bus that isn't going to stop for anything. So it's just a response to that frustration is what it becomes about. And
That's
then,
really interesting.
And then sort of, I don't think I've shown you the South Africa stuff, but that's another one that will probably, I don't know about releases, but whenever it comes, it comes. It will be before the Morocco one probably. But that one sort of weirdly became about themes of like memento mori and like death, because when you're in South Africa, there is that thing where you're like, this is a really lovely place, you're hanging out, and then, you know, you hear on the radio like someone got shot, the fucking car incidents, like something happened in a township, like all your family members being like, are you okay today? Are you sure you're fine? What do you mean you're across the road from a township? Like, that's fucked. Like, there is that constant reminder of just like,
Mum's blowing up your phone.
Yeah. You're going to die. This is a dangerous place, despite how beautiful it is. So that's what came there. But at the time, I was just basically taking holiday photos, you know what I mean? Until you kind of delve into the signs and like re-editing the photos afterwards.
There is a frustration there sometimes. I always feel like when you're in a new place, there's a moment when you've broken through the like initial glass sheen of the tourist experience.
Yeah.
And there's a certain point where you've penetrated a bit further, and that's when things become really interesting.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, interestingly enough, Morocco was the first trip I'd done in a long time where we were definitely on the sort of, for the most part, on the sort of tourist track. Like, the Medina it's the old town, but it's not like going to an old area of somewhere else. It is a tourist attraction. It's basically Disneyland. Like, it's set up.
It's the only thing I knew about Morocco.
Yeah, it is, and it's Disneyland posing as like you're in the middle of nowhere. Like, and then doing on a tour is like they're driving you through areas that like some people on the tour are being like, man, this is such a poor area, and I'm like, this is the bus route. This is not the the poor area. Like, we're on the tourist track right now. It's fine. Like,
that's crazy.
Like, I think there was one day where we went to somewhere where I was like, this has a different feeling. We're in, like, this is a slightly sort of sketchier area, but not like sketchy in terms of like, it wasn't like dangerous, but it was still just like, this is, we're getting looks for being here. We're not meant, we've gone out of our boundaries, nice, like, you know, bubble, but it's like every other trip we done, like South Africa, we did touristy stuff, but we didn't have tour guides or anything, we just rented a car and just went. Like, cool. we could go wherever we want. We're advised, don't use Apple Maps because it will just take you through very places where you shouldn't drive through. Nice. But so we got to see a lot more of it. And the trip before that, when I was in Israel, we were staying in a kibbutz with my friend's cousins. So like that wasn't touristy at all. That was like, oh, we're just basically living in Israel. And that was the book where I kind of figured out the idea of the subconscious coming through the photography.
It's really interesting. And when you're in it's interesting how that arises. Like when you were talking about how you felt a tangible shift when you were in Morocco and it just felt like a different space, how your photography responds to that, because your photography is kind of it's a tell of how you're acting, and it's a tell of like how maybe your comfort and your anxieties. So that can be quite interesting. Just look at yourself, you know, in your archives. Yeah,
and just sort of embracing that rather than trying to fight against it. Because I think the other thing about being in Morocco as well, it's like the Medina specifically is very photographed, like historically and stuff. So like and nothing's really changed. So like you're looking around and you're like, yeah, that's a photo that was taken in the 1960s and it still looks exactly as it did. Like, it's very hard not to make work that's like this, you know, like you'd pick up a guide and see that type of photography, you know what I mean? There. Like, it's sort of like, it's hard to pull away from stuff because everything seems almost set up for everyone to get the same type of photos. Yeah. You don't feel like you're somewhere, certain parts you feel like you're somewhere real, like when you go a little bit off, but like for the most part it's just like, this is a very strange space. But
it's interesting you say that. It reminds me of kind of how I'm acting, what I'm looking for when I'm out and about. I think I'm always like trying to escape things I've seen before. Like if I'm in a city, I always find myself pulling down the side alleys, or like maybe looking into like this garden, or like checking this like bombed out building, etc, you know, like looking for those places that are just kind of away from it, looking away from eyes.
And it's that sort of thing I also had in uni, was like we did a few sort of trips with the course, and the mentality I sort of developed was like, when everyone else pulls their camera out, that's the moment I'm putting my camera away, and I'm gonna
glorified tourist trip, basically.
Is what it sort of becomes, because it's like, well, if everyone's instinct is to take a photo of something, then okay, we're all gonna end up with 20 of the same photos, you know what I mean? And there is like
interesting crit, will it?
but it goes beyond that. Like, you know, vernacular photography is like so much, like I'd probably say 80% of it is like every photo has like 10,000 copies, and then there's 20% of like weirdness, but it's trying not to, and in a world where just like everything is fucking photographed to death, trying to find something that's like, maybe it ties back to that space that's like, oh, I like it and I don't know why, is because you're kind of pushing into stuff that's slightly out of the norm. I feel like people in photography tend to not play it safe, that's the wrong way of putting it, but there's certain rules that people try and stick to, and it's like, at what point does that stop producing progress? Probably pretty quick.
No, you're right. Or at the very least, like, stop producing intrigue, right? Like, I don't know about you. I mean, we spoke about this before, but it takes so much for me to be like absorbed in a photo and like just be really intrigued in like what's going on. Be like, I don't know what's going on here. Like,
and that feeling of like, oh, this is something that if I don't pay attention to now, I'm not going to see it again.
Yeah, like I could learn
It's like,
something if I really dive into this maybe, and be curious and ask questions. But I think maybe that is what it is. It's like maybe trying to escape vernacular, because I guess that just means escaping the common language of photography, right? And trying to do something new.
I guess it's escaping it, but you can't. That's what that space is. It rides the line between, like, obviously there's signs and symbols that mean things. Like, if you push it too far, eventually you end up with just a photo of potentially nothing. And if it's like too weird, people aren't going to have any response to it apart from like. And it's not necessarily bad if they have a response of like disgust or a negative emotion, because that's still a response. But it's the response where people just kind of like brush past it. If it doesn't have it, like if you don't hold anyone for any amount of time, that's the failure. Is where someone just flicks by as though, and I think that's where it becomes sort of a loop, because there's photos that are way too common, like a picture of a McDonald's burger. We've seen a million. You don't barely pay attention to a McDonald's ad anymore because it's just, oh yeah, I know, straight on. And stuff that's too unfamiliar to the point where there's like, people have no in point.
No, you're so right. Yeah, it's it can be like a bit of a wall, right? It's I think that can be more challenging with black and white as well, because it's there's an element of it takes you to another place because you're not seeing how you would see normally. So you're like working hard with light and shadow, aren't you, to make something resonate. But yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's the battle, isn't it? It's trying to capture intrigue without it being just using ubiquitous imagery that everyone's seen a million times. It's difficult.
Yeah, and obviously the more time goes on, more people take more photos, and then it's like, I do wonder if there's a point where it's just like not intriguing to the point where it just kind of loses its. I think it would still have its sort of functions in society, but I think like, and it hasn't happened to any other art form, but I do wonder about all of them. Like, what point do we reach the edge where there's nothing more to be done? Like, and if there's going to be one where there is nothing more to be done, it's probably photography, because it's kind of like to an extent like a limited medium. Like,
it's
there's only
limitation, I think.
Yeah, which arguably is sort of a, you know, beautiful simplicity to it, but at the same time, like, is it a bit like Vine, where eventually there's only so much you can do within the format before it's just like, well, we just keep repeating. But
no, that's interesting. I think like for me, I think we're in such an interesting time because of it. I think it manifests a lot in like things like Instagram, and like, I suppose that's where you would be confronted by images the most, and just your day-to-day. It is for me anyway. But like, I'm not having any kind of emotional resonance from what I'm seeing or looking at. It's like an apathy that's been built.
Yeah,
you know, even
a numbness. Right?
Even looking at people I care about, or things that I'm actually invested in, seeing their Instagram, just doesn't resonate, you know. You blow right past it. And you get the same in other kinds of like image dissemination, like advertising. Is obviously, that's been like, everyone knows that. That's just. But yeah, just generally, I think I don't know this, but like, I'd be curious if it's like just breeding a generalized apathy in people, you know.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things. Just maybe we're the only two that feel that way, because I remember you telling me about was it Ansel Adams lecture, where it was sort of
what did I say?
You kind of described I think it was a lecture with Ansel Adams in history, and your response was kind of just like, why is this so special? Almost, yeah, sort of just like, which I, in a weird way, like, not in a weird way, just straight up relate to when I started photography at like GCSE. Like, nothing really. Even like, that was my first encounter with different fine art photographers, and it was just like everything we were looking at, it was just until we kind of got a bit more into it. But a lot of stuff I was already sort of like, that's boring, boring.
We're in such an interesting spot, aren't we? Because our whole lives now, and we're like the first, well, we're one of the first generations in human history where this has happened, but like we don't need to be captivated by things like that anymore. Like if someone had seen Ansel Adams in like, I don't know, 1940 or something, then that's still going to be like, oh wow, like, you know, look at these like images. But now you just you've seen things like Yosemite, you've seen pictures of Yosemite in magazines, tourist photos and stuff. So by the time that you get to the original Yosemite craftsman who photographed the nose, you just don't really care, or at least it just doesn't resonate.
It's just another one in the massive pool of them. And also like his
historical canon makes no difference, does it? It's
and also even like the amount of effort he put in to shoot it on large format and on film, and the printing and the zone system and all of this fucking technical genius he figured out. You know, fucking Apple were looking at and built the technology into the iPhone. So modern day equivalent, he fucked around with some sliders and got the result. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's so much easier. So you can't even, for people who don't want to, you know, learn the process, they're never going to appreciate the craft, because you can get pretty much identical results a lot easier nowadays, which again, I think builds that apathy because of the attitude of like, well, anyone can do it. And it's easy. I've got an app on my phone that puts on a Polaroid effect. Who cares? Like, you know what I mean? It's like all that stuff gets sort of fed back in, which I guess leaves photographers' jobs really not to get up to that standard, but to find a new sort of standard, which is and I don't know whether it's just the artists that appeal to me that I end up focusing on, but seems to be sort of what creates each generation, you know, the people who push the limits with like, you know, the new topographics, you know, pissed half the people off who came because they're like, what the fuck is this? But actual photographers tended to find those, or like an art theorist found that exhibition more intriguing than just like the stuff that the general public were like, oh, aren't these pictures pretty, you know? And you notice that on repeat, you know, Eggleston or like Ernst Haas, when they came up with like color photography, everyone's like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is bullshit. This just looks like normal stuff. It's like us guys, we look at Eggleston, we're like, holy shit, this is fucking cool.
Genius.
Yeah. But same with, you know, Moriyama and like however many other 100 guys who did something different that went through that fringe phase where it rode that line and then eventually got accepted into the canon where it's now part of it.
It's weird. I think you're right. I think it's unless you're on this side of photography, you just can't fully appreciate like the art of what's gone into and just the physical labor as well, and the time and the investment of like something like Eggleston or Adams' work. It's just not something you'd understand or care to understand. Yeah,
and I feel like there is a thing about like the craft aspect has sort of been not lost, but
certainly was for me. Like, I started photography moving fucking sliders. That's exactly what I did.
But the thing, like, because we don't darkroom print anymore, really, like, and a lot of the editing is done, you know, digitally. I mean, any craft aspect is sort of like anything you can do in camera, so lighting and things like that. But a lot of people overlook that aspect. Like the amount of people we've had here doing work experience who are like, what do you mean you took one photo and we've spent 4 hours setting it up with the lighting? And it's like, yeah, that's how much fucking work it takes to get it right. Like we had to, especially if you have to edit it onto something else, like you have to be this precise. And they're like, oh, I thought you were just going to take a phone snap and edit it on. It's like, no, that's going to take us fucking years to get those to work.
Next day they quit photography.
Yeah.
They're like, this isn't for me.
They're like, fucking hell. But it's like, it goes overlooked. And I think as well, it's like almost, it feels like a battle between like the amount of time put in and the labor and stuff goes unnoticed. So who fucking cares? But also then you find, because
That's interesting. Hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking about, and this might be like a weird tangent, but like Moriyama's work is almost seen as like haphazard, and like each picture doesn't have a lot of time and effort put into it.
Yeah.
But he makes up for it because he's shot 10 million photos,
Right.
as opposed to like Gregory Crewdson, where he does, you know, there's probably double digits across his whole career, but he goes to the extreme of like shutting down roads and like changing traffic lights and printing it all manually and all of this stuff.
Becomes a film set with him.
Yeah, exactly, and all the effort that goes in. Like, there's like almost a desperation to show off, like, no, this is how much effort goes in, even though in theory that shouldn't really matter, because what we've discussed right now is, for all of this, isn't like how much effort went in, it's the output at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think that's always something photography struggled with, because you can take a photo of someone and it will look like someone, versus you know, the painter who's like, not everyone can do that,
Sure,
especially nowadays. So it's kind of, it feels like it's always had that sort of chip on its shoulder, where it's like, well, if you're going to put less time into an image, then you have to make up for it with quantity.
Yeah. No, you're so right. It's so different to like a piece of film or like a painting, like you say, where the man hours are so tangible. You know, with a photograph, it's kind of an enigmatic object. You don't know what's gone into it. You don't know what's behind it. You don't know. There's no sense of who the person is just by like looking at the thing itself, shot from the photographer. You're taking one precise moment, as opposed to in a painting like hours and hours of experience that you can see gesturally.
Yeah.
Or if it's cinema, then it's just a concurrent image. So it's quite interesting in that sense.
And I think any work that does take loads and loads of time, it's kind of one of those things where if you've done the work right that took the most time, it's invisible.
Yeah.
Like if you get your lighting, the extra lighting you're using really, really right, the end goal usually is to make something that looks still naturalistic and could be real.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Because if you make it too obvious you've used additional lighting or Photoshop something, it's a failure, because people just go, oh, I know how it was done, or it looks like that. As if you get it right, people just go, damn, doesn't that look amazing? And then they just assume it's natural.
Yeah. I suppose, like, in that sense, photographers really need to just be perfectionists, and the ones that stick around must love it, because you're not. Sometimes it must feel like you're not, or maybe you don't. I don't know. As someone who's doing like more commissions than me, maybe you don't feel like this. But is it like ever a sense of like what I'm putting in isn't exactly showing, but this I'm happy with it, but like
well, it does show, because even though people don't recognize exactly what went in, if it's effective, it's effective. So people still go, oh, isn't that cool? But I think the difference is, in commissions, you're often trying to craft something specific. Yeah, okay. As in artwork, you're trying to find those new spaces. So it's kind of, the art side of things is the more explore, maybe it'll hit, maybe it won't. Here's the result of the experiment. As the commission work has to be more precise. And you can't, and I was talking to another photographer I was working with a couple of weeks back, and we were laughing because he was like, nothing pisses me off more when a client comes to me and they're like, let's make a piece of art, because they don't understand that, like, you do not want a piece of art to advertise your product, because it's not going to be the effective advertising you think you're going to get. Like, yeah. And it's like, it's a different thing, completely different approach. And it's like, so if you want an art piece off of me, it might get done in 20 years. Like, it could be, I'm going to go about it very differently, and it's going to piss you off. But
you'll have all sorts of weird deadlines. You're only here for me for 2 weeks. But it's true.
And that's, again, just the misunderstanding. Because what they mean when they're like, let's make a piece of art, is that they mean like, let's make something really cool. But it's not art, because it's not pushing or exploring anything. It's essentially playing it safe. Like, you're pushing it up to about 60-70%.
So do you think what they're actually asking for is like something like trendy aesthetically or something like that?
Yeah, most of the time.
Yeah.
They want, it needs to be, you know, we were talking about like if you push it too far, no one will engage with it.
Yeah.
Like for commercial stuff, you have to pull it back again. For something that's got to consistently, like, you've got to be precise, one, in technical aspects, but two, in like what your output of meaning is. So you can't, you know, like, if someone hired you to take pictures to make people want to travel to Morocco, you can't take pictures out of the coach window to just be like, well, this is my response to it. Like, that's never going to fly. Like, you can do that as the artwork and it can be interesting and it does have meaning. But, you know, a holiday guide is going to be like, they're going to be pissed. You know what I mean? What? Yeah, they'd be like, what the fuck have you done? And like, and also it might not end up like that. It, like, normally they know exactly what they want. You just have to go and fill in the blanks, basically.
They'll probably already be a bit up against the wall when you turn in some like pitch contrast, Moriyama-esque black and white photos. Like, what am I looking at?
Or when you tell them like, okay, so I'm coming next week and I don't know what the end result's going to be. They're like, the fuck do you mean you don't know? Shouldn't you have like planned where you're going and everything? Like, so it's a completely different approach. But
and I think for the most part I worked out that wasn't for me, to be honest. But that's fine. Like, there's certain jobs I would still do. Some fashion stuff is very intriguing to me, and music stuff I would do. Apart from that, I'm not massively interested. Like, I've thought at times like it'd be crazy to like go to like war zones, do like war photography or something like that. That's like extremely dynamic, and you tell some amazing stories. But I feel like maybe I'm not like built for like maybe assignment like photography. Just like you say, it's so different. Yeah,
and you want to be I don't know, I feel like in my personal work I just want to be sort of subjected to whatever gets thrown at you. As like even when you said about like the war stuff, and that's like kind of what you're doing there is like documentary stuff, but they still send you out with an angle and like a specific thing. Like, so you're not completely at the place's mercy just to like go with it and produce what's handed to you. You still have to go and hunt certain things out, which can be fun too, but also like incredibly sort of frustrating and sometimes dishonest and sometimes sort of just, you know, making the best of it rather than being like, oh, what's actually going on here? And that's what creates the most interesting work.
Sure. No, yeah, you're right. I think I wouldn't mind it as much, like you say, in like a scenario like that, because it just feels like you're so alive, like you're so in something that's like present and important. And I feel like just going between different things that you've been assigned to photograph would be like more compelling. So maybe it's just that, but I don't know. I know what you mean.
I think as well, to be fair, documentaries, like, for me, occupies like the space between just like someone coming and needing an advert and the full just producing more artwork based stuff. It still rides that line because it's got that real world element, and I think it is just that makes the difference.
Have you ever had a car alarm go off?
Actually, no. I think the weirdest one we had was my mum was doing one and some kid started crying outside, and it was like, it wasn't being picked up, but like, because we just rolled through it, because I was sat at the monitor and it wasn't being picked up, but I could see my mum being like talking, but because she just does it on her own, but trying to be like, is it okay? And I'm like nodding. Like, it's a funny watch when you know what's going on. But
what were you doing with your mum? What was she talking about?
So she's a teaching lecturer. Okay. So the uni pushed her to make a podcast. It's basically a sales podcast for the course that teaches like PGC and BAs in teach training essentially.
So she's not a lecturer?
No, she is as well. She's lecturer but course lead on the PGC, which is like a course you do, like say you can do any degree and then an extra year and you get qualified teacher status.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's, but she oversees the other course as well. So like the normal 3-year teaching course, the masters and other stuff. But yeah.
Okay. So you could have like a little mother-son setup on the pod.
Basically, but yeah, it's basically just a sales podcast.
Okay.
It's quite similar to what we've been talking about. Like that one is like she writes it out and she just like reels it off like 15 minutes. As this is more just like you don't know what you're going to be talking about before you sit down. But that's the interesting part.
I guess it's the point. Right?
Yeah. And I think with a show that me and Alex are planning to have to keep doing until we drop dead, that's what will keep us interested the longest. And I think that's what, as well with photography, like you say, you've got to do, or just life, you can just do what you actually enjoy rather than like forcing yourself to.
And you just be something. Curious, like, you know, if you knew everything that was going to happen, you wouldn't do anything because it'd just be boring. I think, like, I don't know. I think, my work's a lot like that. I just get bored so easily. And I get disinterested very quickly, and so I'm always just trying to like keep that passion alive, you know, because otherwise I just stagnate and don't do anything. Yeah. But this is a pretty good thing you got going. So like, how far has the podcast come? Do you think, like, since you started, like, what do you think's changed? You must be better at it as well.
I think better. Well, I ran a podcast before this one. So I had a little, which was pretty much identical format that I ran actually into the early first couple of months of the studio, but it was a very different sort of, it was much more, from what we've been talking about, much more into that sort of art category where it was really like, there was no what are we going to talk about, and there was a lot of just like, I'm just going to let awkward silences hang just to see what happens. Like it goes from being like extremely weird and wacky to like hard to watch.
Like, my God. Does sound like quite a fun watch though, to be honest.
Yeah, like some of them are, and like just okay, if one's going to be 4 hours, it's going to be 4 hours, and if one's going to be 20 minutes, who cares? This is me sort of saying like, okay, here's from that experiment, here's what didn't work and what needs to be sort of sorted out. So yeah, but this podcast, like we've done, I think we must have done at least 20 episodes now. Okay. Even if, like, then obviously we're not all out, we pre-record. But I think the response has been way sort of bigger than we thought it would be.
Yeah. It's a very professional setup. And
yeah, funny how that helps compared to the old one that was just GoPro slapped to the wall and like a shitty voice recorder. But yeah.
Hard. You've had a lot of like musicians, right? Like music people on the podcast? Yeah,
and that's mainly because like a lot of the people we worked with were musicians, so it makes sense to get them on, and they're always good to talk to and doing stuff. But I think as well that was the thing, the trap we didn't want to fall into was to just do what, like the old one was a lot of musicians, and I didn't want it to become a music podcast because it's the Photomafia podcast. So like trying to steer in more visual artists, which obviously with the studio we've got a much better platform to do that now. And these it's like episodes with you and other photographers are the ones that I prefer doing because I can really get into that a bit more.
This is your area as well, like you can go deep.
Yeah, exactly. As the music ones can still get deep, but it's more they end up being more about wider, more general creative sort of things that go across, like not medium specific. As these, like you
cultural things.
Like as with this, we can get really specific into stuff, which is
we'll be talking about the f-stop on a certain Ansel Adams photo. And I was like, what are you nerds on about?
God, yeah, we might switch a few people off at that point, or build a very dedicated audience. You never know.
Yeah, it can go either way, can't it?
But yeah, so it's been interesting. I think as well with the sort of 2-host format as well, because we go back and forth, me and Alex, which also is partially just the case of trying to fit it in around doing everything else, because you only have to have enough to do an episode every other week rather than every week, as like the old podcast used to be. Like 1 week I release 6 episodes, and then 1 week it would be like you haven't done anything for 6 months, and it'd be like, is the show dead? And I'm like, no. As this feels consistent, it's just building. But it's
so you now it's like you're fitting it in around like the commission work. Because you have quite a lot of work going on, don't you guys?
Yeah, so around the commissions, the exhibitions, whatever else we're doing, life, basically. I think that's the hardest part of podcasts, if anything, because people come to us about doing podcasts, and it's like, you don't have time, like, to just... and I think the hardest part is the initial setting up, because for us, like, I got kind of lucky where in January I had a bit of time off from like a regular commission that I do, which is the one where I went to Morocco with. So I had a month off from that, which gave us enough time to pre-record enough episodes to get us ahead and like figure out how the setup was and what we needed and all that other sort of stuff, who we wanted to have on, and get all those in, which puts us ahead, which means like, okay, so I went to Marrakesh for 17 days and the podcast still kept going. Sure. We've still got episodes, and it's like you can chill rather than it being like the tendency with a lot of things and what creative people tend to do, which is like stressing because, oh shit, it's Wednesday again. We haven't filmed anything, or like we haven't done it. Oh, fuck. Which also is what kills the experience, especially like with the old show. It was just like, oh fuck, I haven't done one in ages, let's try and get it in. I'm not enjoying it. Like, it just becomes like a chore. As now it feels more just like you can do, I don't have to find guests to fill in gaps. It's just we've got enough. It's like, if I find someone interesting, it's doable, perfect, it will get done.
That's kind of how I approach my like writing a lot of the times, and like my articles now is it's just more like when I come across something that's really like, wow. Like, to be fair, sometimes if I find an artist that's just like working really interestingly, there's certain themes that artists cover that I just enjoy writing about anyway. And then that tends to be like, okay, let's do an article, you know, it's, but I guess there's certain creative output things that you have to kind of be that way, I think.
Yeah, with the article stuff, because I had a quick brief stalk of the internet of you before you arrived earlier, and I was looking at sort of Silver Plus, and last time we spoke, you explained Silver Plus as a platform, but not the element of it with like the articles and stuff like that. You just talked about mainly like this book, so I assumed it was just like a book publishing platform, but it seems like there's a little bit more to it that I saw.
There's big plans for it. It's very early days. Like, it is literally just got off the ground. Instagram was made for it like a few weeks ago. First book is this, obviously, my book Unface. But the idea is for it to be a publishing imprint, like a community blog where people can like talk about visual culture or like contribute like poetic entries about things going on around them, just very experiential things. And then also like a journal where we do like articles on photographers that are interesting, visual artists, anything like that. And then ultimately from that it could be like a nice community of like artists working in the same way, and then maybe we could do shows and things like that, workshops, etc. So, but like I say, it's very early days. That's the plan. But for the time being, just going to publish my books through it, publish friends' books, artists that I like, write articles on people that I find interesting, and just kind of go from there.
That seems like a solid foundation though, like, you know what I mean? And I think with any sort of like these things that end up being bigger projects, it's always sort of the start small, work up sort of attitude where you don't bite off more than you can chew.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, going back to the podcast was like one of the things. It's like, if we had gone through that month where I had time off and we hadn't got the 10 episodes, then it could have been like a thing that we just said, okay, well, if I can't do it now, we're not going to be able to do it normally. Like, we'll have to scrap it, like, you know what I mean, if you can't pull it off. So, like...
Okay, well, I mean, that's kind of where my head's at, I think. I'm not wanting to go too quick too soon. I mean, when it first started, I was like, right, I'm gonna like have all these articles lined up to go. This person gonna give me a shout out on this day. Like, we're gonna blow this up to like X amount of followers straight away. But I think it's just, I'm quite happy for it to be more organic actually, and just kind of chip away at it, let it take its form,
and let it be a bit more real. And I think realistically, like, that's the best way. I think the only reason like there's this pressure to make it so like full on is you know, when Instagram was like, you have to post every day, otherwise your account gets ignored.
Oh mate, I hate that so much, man. I'm shit with Instagram. Like, posts are like so mentally taxing for me. I'm like, okay, you've got to word this properly, you know. Can't make any spelling mistakes because people think I'm a writer, so got to make sure that's not happening either. It's just a minefield.
Yeah,
and
it's
then
horrible.
I also find it, I don't know about if you get this, but I find it hard to know like what to push out into like the public eye, like what it should like characterize me or like the project that's going on. And
yeah, we struggle across the Photomafia platform and my own platform as well. Like, it's which, like, you met Matt earlier who does our social media. Like, he's been a fucking godsend because he can figure out like how to make things not like too like throwing everything at people at once.
I need me and Matt then.
Yeah,
because I haven't got a clue. But yeah,
it's definitely like just the way to keep it delineated. And I think as well, it's like peeling stuff back to their sort of base form. And not needing like, which ironically as well, we had the podcast, like my original podcast was like, how do I explain all the stuff we do? Like, oh, well, if I talk for fucking hours and hours, eventually someone will get it, which isn't necessarily the smartest way. But, and also why I was like quite excited to like realize this through line through all my work, because that gives me something where like, it just gives that nice, comfortable thing for people to latch onto, rather than them having to wrap their head around and figure it out too much on their own. It kind of gives them the two sides that they can fill in the middle. It gives them the boundaries to work within, you know what I mean? I think that's what makes Instagram difficult, is because if you go and post something too outlandish, people just are like, well, don't know what this is. Like, I'm confused, what's going on? Like, I thought I was following the person for this type of content, now they give me something else.
That might be it, actually.
And it's a ball ache because people aren't just like one thing, but I think I don't know. It's a tricky space to navigate. I'm getting slowly better at it, and I'm noticing as well, like photography, people don't respond to you just posting your photos, which unfortunately sometimes you have to do because it still wants you to consistently post. People respond a lot more to like physical stuff. So I'm not sure if when you posted like the book, you probably noticed a bit more of an engagement.
By far, easily.
People will engage with doing rather than here's a photo of something. So it's sort of,
which I think just goes to show what we're talking about, right? It's like people are just utterly bored, just like seeing images. But if like they see it like being disseminated in another way, in like something tangible, physical and real, something they can actually encounter physically, then it's a bit more,
And I think that also ties into that, well, we spoke when I was last with you about the sort of idea of like putting people in the right headspace, which I think we spoke about in the context of sort of like when they come to the exhibition tomorrow, like what have we got in place to make them look? But I think it also ties in like Instagram is not like, if you think like it can be frustrating when you post a really cool photo and no one cares when you put it on Instagram. But if you try and reverse it, like when you open Instagram, are you looking to be fucking challenged?
You're so right.
You're looking to turn off your mind and like, you know.
Yeah, you're so right.
That's not the space to be necessarily putting out that stuff.
Yeah.
As saying like, oh, I have a book to sell. That's the sort of mindless stuff that like people actually go, oh, it's something I can buy. It's something that he's trying to promote. Cool. That's what people attach to. You know what I mean? They don't attach to like really deep ideas.
But that's why what you've got going on is great, because then you've got that space where that can flourish. Like the exhibition, that's what that's for. So that you can take your time, you know, walk at your own pace, quite literally.
Yeah. And as well, like the book like this, it's like when people engage with that, they aren't, it just, whatever sort of thing Instagram does to your brain, it just puts them in a different mode entirely and lets them actually engage with the work as it's meant to be. And that's why a lot of times you find people who get mad at like Instagram photographers because like realistically they never make anything that's really that challenging.
Sure.
But that is why they do well on Instagram. And they don't do well in exhibition or in book format necessarily, because because that's when people go, oh, this is actually quite mindless, digestible sort of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yes, right. I suppose it's that. Yeah, I mean, I think that is what's. I suppose the good thing from that is like it encourages people to kind of push their work out into a new way, like physically, like thinking about how they can actually present their work in an exhibition, in a show.
And it keeps that alive.
Yeah, there's almost like a guilt if I'm like just posting stuff on Instagram. 'Cause it's like I'm like preaching to an audience that doesn't really care, because like you.
Or it still could be people who care, because it's still people who like the book and then may go on and buy it.
Yeah.
But it's just at the point where they don't care. Like it's that time of the day when they go on there is not.
Sorry,
the time
I can word it
is.
better. I think what you said is true. Like the state of mind is different.
Yeah.
Like when you're on Instagram, it's like you're not looking to be engaged, are you? Really, it's quite mindless.
Yeah, you want to be. You've had a hard day at the office and you're fucking just waiting to go to bed, sort of thing. Like, unless you wanted to touch on the book in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I can do. Yeah, it was in large part, it's a collection of work I did in like my final days of university. But then it's been slightly edited and things have been added afterwards. But it's, my first like properly print-run book, Unface. It's about self-identity in the digital age, essentially. And like, I suppose the confusion around it. It's about like the curation and the formulation of our own images of ourselves, and like how that kind of affects the way we see ourselves. Again, it's kind of me saying that is one thing. Like you wouldn't necessarily take that just from the images, but like the forms of imagery I'm using and like the way it resonates for me is interesting. And there was also a large writing element of this, which would kind of make it more substantial and give you that impression. So the book has a couple of poems in it at the back. About self-identity, about things we were just talking about, and there's like various note-taking throughout. In fact, the notes throughout the book originally come from a short story I did about a photographer who feels as if his images have like become their own person. So like he's kind of become split, and his like image self is kind of going to war with him and like vying for like power of who the real him is. And so there's like bits of dialogue in there about him like frantically talking to himself like a madman, thinking he's losing control of his image. But that's essentially where it comes from.
And that's a very interesting and also like prevalent topic as well. Like sort of have things like people with body dysmorphia and stuff kind of, it sounds like you talked about it almost in like a jokey manner, but there is like very real sort of connections with those sort of things.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of ties in with like what I was saying earlier about how photography's greatest asset is like you go in and fake it and people still perceive it as real. Yeah, and there's a point where you also accept it as real and like...
Sure. Well, Roland Barthes says something very interesting in Camera Lucida. He talks about how people's like memories are so fragile that images will not only complement your memories, but they'll actually overtake and destroy your real memories. And so if I think, I don't know if you get this, but if I think back to certain things that have happened in my life or certain points, certain stretches of time, one of the first things I think of is just my camera roll photos from that time period. Like if I think of uni, my head's like flashing through like familiar images on my camera roll that I've seen like countless times of people that are important to me. I don't necessarily think of experience themselves, which I think is just a really interesting thing.
Yeah, and that is true. I mean, that's kind of what people use photos for anyway, isn't it? And I guess it is like a dangerous thing to treat them as exact memories, and also to... Yeah, it's just that idea of them as real, which isn't... Eko Hozoi says something interesting where it's like you make your own reality with photography, and it's like it looks real, but it's not. And it is just slightly devious in a way. And it's just how you play on that is where you sort of get very interesting kind of work. And you can, but you have to be careful as well, because you can accidentally say things that you don't intend and piss off people. And that's another thing you see in commission work as well, is certain people you meet have very built up expectations of what they should look like on camera.
Okay, yeah, I bet.
And some people are much more just like, a photo of me is a photo of me. Yeah. I look like what I look like, whatever. And it's kind of, it's just interesting to see how that forms, because sometimes they believe like they look a certain way, and it's like, well, because you knew a little bit about photography and you dabbled in it, and you've done something dangerous here, and it can be very difficult to work around sometimes when they ask for specific things. And I'm like, well, you've already imposed certain rules about how you have to be photographed. So this idea is now impossible, like without some very insane level of editing. Like, be hard to deal with. Yeah, and it's just sort of like,
photography is so interesting, man, because it exists in a space between reality itself and what we want reality to be. And it's like, it's in this weird grey area that you're digesting and understanding the images we see. Like, I'm imagining like myself when I'm flicking through a photo book of a place. Like, there's this strange, like, uncanny thing going on where it's like I'm looking at and I'm understanding that as a time and a place and with events that happened. But there's a weird acceptance,
and there's almost no suspension of disbelief. It's not like a movie where, like, you know it's not real, but you can still let yourself be emotionally swayed by it. There's no thing, like, when you look at a photo book, you don't assume anything's been faked. The default is it's real.
Yeah.
But, put it into 24 frames per second, and it's a video, and you assume it's fake until it's verified as real. Like, it's a very strange thing, and I think it's that weird space that's interesting to play with.
I suppose it depends what we mean by fake as well, right? And I think, again, like, it depends on the context of the imagery, because a lot of the images I use are just fake, just through and through. In fact, I almost enjoy it, like, just making a photograph as irreal as possible. That's what I think is interesting about photography, is just the irreality of it. But like, for you, like, commission stuff, it's like, is this real? Am I being authentic to my experience and the place I was in, like, physically and psychologically?
And I don't think any of it's real. Like, it's like, in a weird way. Like,
in what sort of way?
It's impossible to take. I think even with the stuff where you're trying to be genuine, or you still have an angle, and also, like, photography is going to do some level of disservice to reality. Like, it can't. It's always going to have something that signifies something to someone that then changes the meaning, or I don't know. I just don't. I think it would almost be more if someone could take a photo that's like, I don't know, somehow the most mundane, most real. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but, like, you just can't take
like
a real photo, like
or it objectively exists. Do you mean? Like,
like it. Maybe it ties in with sort of it being whether you're adding some level of subjectivity, but like you say, it depends on what you mean by real. But I find it very hard to think of an example of a photograph that is just real. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not doable. Thing. Like, it's just like this, the act of taking a photo of it just destroys reality immediately. It just reproduces it somewhat, but it's still not. Not that.
That's what's interesting about photography, man. It's like a kind of perverted thing in a way. Like, you're just taking from something pure, like reality in the first sense, and it's just like you're slowly degrading it. And like photography, the process of it is a destructive one. Daisuke Ikora talks a lot about, like, memory and stuff. And he's, I think it's from him I heard that, like, photography is in essence like a destructive thing. Like, you're slowly peeling away, like, layers of reality. Like, the fabric of memory, it's like dissolves every time you reprint a photograph.
And you're also just, like, even just taking it, you're cutting out fucking a square out of everything
yeah.
else. Like you're still, even that is a decision of what you're getting rid of from the reality of a situation. You know,
like prison.
Yeah,
Yeah, but there's a choice, isn't there? It's each time it's becoming more of a subjective thing, more of a predestined thing. So it's inherently impure in that way, but it's just interesting for the same reason.
It's impure, but people assume it's pure. That's what makes it. That's the balance. It's that people's default just go in. People embrace it. They don't see photography the same way as you see a painting. They see the reality within it, not the photography.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
They accept, no matter how much additional lighting you made to make it sort of hyper real, people just go, yeah, that product looks like that.
Yeah,
that's what it is. Yeah. That's the never-ending experience of seeing a McDonald's advert and going, that looks good, and then buying it and being like, fuck.
Yeah.
That's not that McDonald's has dropped their quality, it's that the picture isn't real, but people just assume that the McDonald's you went to dropped the ball. It's like, no, the burger in the advert doesn't exist.
Exactly,
but your mind defaults and just accepts it. It's it's sort of Plato's cave to an extent. You know, it's the Matrix. It's just
Well, but in some sense it is. It's like the layers of reality are confused, and advertising is just exceptionally pervasive in that way, because you don't understand the way that it's working on you. Like, you're encountering it like you would any other object, but it's showing like a whole different landscape of reality. Did you know that the guy that took this form of advertising that's psychologically predicated, the guy that took that nationwide in America, he was Sigmund Freud's nephew or something.
Right.
That's
okay.
how
mad.
That's how legit this stuff is. It's extremely clever.
And it's some other random fact about advertising, but it's the way it works on the mind is just it can shift cultures. Apparently it's it was to do with some TV advert that just made the idea of having bacon for breakfast a thing.
Really?
So before that point wasn't a thing. It was just in this one TV advert, and then people just kind of accepted it as part of the culture. And there's various things like that where it's just you can move stuff in, and it's that's why in the 30s in America, when all the new appliances were coming out and they started, advertising became more prevalent, and they were oh, our sales have tripled because it just makes it look like this is the done thing.
Yeah.
Apparently didn't work as well in Europe for whatever reason, but
because we're smarter.
Yeah, apparently we realised. But but that's why propaganda works. You know what I mean? Because it just, people just go with it. You can there's and I think that's across a lot of media. There's an interesting thing as well of where they sat kids down with their grandparents, and the grandparents told stories, and the kids just are kids and just don't listen, don't care, just want to scream and shout. They recorded it and then played the kids the recording, and they happily sat and listened to the tape.
Really?
That's so
interesting.
People buy in, and I lent this book to my friend that had that in it and a few other things, and he never gave it back, and I can't remember the title of the book, and I need to fucking heckle him for it. But
maybe it's a visual stimulation thing. I mean, people are definitely comfortable in gazing at things. People will sit for hours playing games, right? Sitting in front of the TV. We're definitely comfortable with just digesting things like that. It's very easy.
Yeah. And the other interesting one in there was it was some native group that basically a company had started producing trinkets that were representative of their culture, but weren't actually anything like what they produced. But it'd been going on so long that people, when they discovered, were shown these stuff, they just assumed it was these are crafts from our people, and then they were your people never made this type of stuff. This is the stuff your people made, and it's very different.
Wow.
And they just would not accept it. They were like, no, our people did this for hundreds of years. And they're like, no, it was a company that produced these things that it doesn't exist, like would not accept it. Like, you know, people.
That's crazy.
And I think that effect is what, keeps things,
Because you're describing how this like sort of like replication affects the way we understand history as well. And like distorts what we understand to be like true.
Well, it's like the idea of like all these historical figures with paintings of them, like, you know, kings way before photography was invented. We just assume, if I told you to picture William Shakespeare, you're probably picturing that version of him that comes from a painting or a statue. There's no way of verifying he actually looked like that. And to be honest, a lot of them with these sort of highly figures, it's the same as when you're hired as a photographer. It's like, make me look good. Like they weren't drawing the king's like fucked up teeth or like warts and stuff. They're changing all of that. They're like changing skin tone. All of it's up to interpretation. Yeah. But we just accept it because we assume that, oh, we've got that. Same with a photo. It can be, you know, people's faces change if you move a light around. Like we've all put a torch under their face at a campfire, but if you do it more subtly and in a photograph, people just buy into how a person looks.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, on one hand, like you say, if photography is done in a certain way, then it can be a tremendous tool for, well, I suppose like justice and democracy and for like understanding something authentically for how something was. Like it's a proof, you know, it's an evidential object. But, you know, with photographers, we're the magicians of reality. Like we can change things. We can change the way people understand what they think is real. Yeah. And I think there is something like magic to do with it, honestly. Like, because the way it is understood by people is that it's truth. You know, it's strange. And now that we've got so many devices to make that not the case, it's like how do you trust what you see? You know, it's
And then someone went and invented AI, and we're just all fucked.
Yeah, cheers, pal. Nice one.
just as we were just about to figure it out, and now it's like,
got no hope.
Yeah, but it's just a weird thing. But that's what makes it interesting. That's what keeps pulling you back. Yeah, I feel like as a photographer.
That's why this whole domain is so interesting, man. It's because it's so like, it's just so nebulous. Like you can't. It's just nothing's clear. Like everything's so blurry and it's hard to understand anything. But then it's like, that's just interesting. But what do you make of like AI, like artwork and like photographers using AI and stuff like that?
Tried to keep an open mind. I think it's still in its sort of infancy, which is where a lot of people reject things off the bat, because what we're seeing from it so far, like in terms of like AI art, I can understand why people are like, this isn't that interesting. Someone just types something and it spits something out and they post it, you know what I mean? But I think as it goes on, it will find different uses. Like take anything, like early photography arguably isn't that interesting to us anyway, but at the time it's like magic. But it's sort of, it's in its infancy. I feel like it's something everyone should have a play with, and it definitely has its uses in terms of like working photography. Like it can speed up the process or spit you out like the worst thing ever. Yeah, just for like small things that used to take like hours in Photoshop can now be done. Like arguably you type out a sentence and it will modify the image for you.
That's quite impressive.
You might not get what you want, but you know, it could.
So it's like a visual chat GBT.
Yeah, basically. It's wild. But I think as well, it's sort of like, it'll get to a point where, like Photoshop, like a lot of this, that also caused arguments about like, well, is it really photography anymore if we're Photoshopping it? Which you could argue it's more graphic design type stuff you're doing on top, but it's fed back in. Same with digital cameras came out and people are like, is this really photography? Like, you know what I mean? So it's all that sort of thing. I find the AI thing to be an extension of Photoshop editing at this point.
There was a artist who, for that Overlaps book, the community zine, one of the artists submitted a purely AI project, and it was, well, a couple of them did actually, but we selected one that was just purely AI, and he did like these like quite like quirky like photos of like, it was like about farmers. It was like a documentary piece, and there was like actual like real context behind it, about like a social issue in farming, and he like did these like funny like photos to illustrate this like comedically, like, you know, you'd see in like you know those like comics back in the day that like take the piss out of political figures, stupid, like it'd be stuff like that, like making like these like farmers' vegetables look overly large, or these farmers like analysing like their like plans like as if it was a war board and things like this, just really just far out cartoony stuff, and it was actually like really interesting, and so we selected it and it got in. But that's like my only experience of it, like kind of being interesting, like used in that sort of way, like quite satirically. Yeah,
and I guess like, that's interesting. 'Cause I've never really seen anything like that. I think the thing it's fighting at the moment is most people just assume like, well, there's no skill to it. You just type something in. But it's like you still have to think of that. It's just a different medium. You know what I mean? I'd be curious where it goes. It's sort of, I think it's too early for it to be interesting, like to the same level that like painting or like photography or writing will be interesting. But like, you know, painting wasn't that interesting when it was just stick figures in a cave. Like it's people that make something interesting, and it's new ideas that's brought to it. Sure. Like, and I guess with AI, like at the moment it's sort of in its infancy, and it will continue to get more and more developed over time. But like the way we can like harness it, you know. I'm thinking of like how, like in the 80s when like all these new music technologies came, and we've like nowadays, like the things that you can do with like drum and bass, like dub and techno, like the sounds we have now that we've just like managed to like distort and find. Like it could be like that with AI. Like we could just like I think so. Stuff. And it does loads of different stuff. Like there's certain things like text to image or text to video now and stuff like that. I think it's just what are people going to bring to it to make it interest. It's always the human element. That's what it's down to. And I feel like the problem is it gets like, it's probably one of the first times there's been like a genuinely new medium, but it was immediately oversaturated because like it's so democratic right out the gate. So like easy. Anyone could do it. You could log in, just type something, you start producing AI artwork. I hate ChatGPT for that. Writing's meant to be hard. That's the point. But still, it's kind of like you do like with ChatGPT. Like it's great for stuff if you have to make something non-human. If you had to write a poem, like ChatGPT can write something that sounds like it can make the Instagram photographer's version of a poem. Like, you know what I mean? It can write like a really hack comedian type of joke that's just like a shit dad joke, but it can't write like new stuff that's genuinely going to put you in that mind space of like think about the medium sort of thing. And that, I guess, we can come back full circle. That's the point of art, isn't it? To be doing something in unknown territory. Not just regurgitating things that are already out there. Yeah, and I think as well, just sort of, people always tie it back to like express yourself, but I think it is just kind of getting ideas across. And it's like when we were talking about the podcast and having musicians on, like still having similar conversations, but instead of them taking pictures, they're creating songs or creating music or painting or doing whatever. Like it's still essentially the same thing. You're trying to get some sort of idea out into something tangible. Like that must be really interesting for you, because I love it when like I can speak to another kind of creative and then I see parallels in what we're doing, even though we're like doing completely different things. It's just quite interesting. It's like, oh, there's like a meta rule here, you know? Yeah, because I think it all comes from the same place. I mean, that's like what a medium is. Like, you know, you have people who can talk to the dead, like, you know what I mean? Like they're called mediums because they connect between the two boundaries. As I think the medium of, say, painting, photography, or whatever, it's your choice of medium that converts it from the stuff that sits in the back of your mind and like can't really be like you saying about photography being used to fill in the gaps that you can't write about, and vice versa. That's because you've still got those ideas. It's just like one medium isn't sufficient to get it across necessarily. It's like, so you bring in something else, like, and using the right tools for the job, basically. Which I think, you're right. I think the space where AI excels hasn't been found yet. As like in photography, we know what it does really well. Which is trick people into buying stuff. And
it's
we
the
know
most economically prosperous art, isn't it?
And we know music's really good at making people feel certain emotions. Like it all ties back to like core emotions of like making people feel a certain way. Painting is kind of similar to photography, but just in the fact that it's visual, but it tends to be more
like expressive and gestural.
Because that's expressive and gestural, but before that it was used similarly to photography. Photography came out and then everyone was like, fuck. Like we're done, and then it had to change and find its own space where it could just painting could be painting rather than trying to be used for something.
And that's why I don't know about you, but modern paintings are much more compelling to me. Like surrealist paintings are my favourite, but I'd much rather go and see those in the MoMA than go and see like the old masters. Even though what they're doing is technically
incredible,
unmatched, it's still more compelling to me. Because I think there's like maybe you're getting to like a root of what painting can actually do in a way. Which is interesting to me. But I do agree. I think photography, for me, I might have said this to you before, but the way it can just initiate new ideas is what makes it so like vital for me. And then when I can then take stuff from that and then incorporate that into the way I write, I think it's a really useful tool.
That's cool. I feel like that's a good place to tie it all together before we I feel like it's come nicely full circle, unless there's anything else you wanted to desperately add or promote or say.
You said it. Said everything.
All right, nice. Well,
sweet. Cool.
Right, let's set up an exhibition.
Let's fucking do it, man.
Nice.